Mike. Thanks so much for coming on. How are you?
Hey, I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Amazing. I've been really excited about this episode because I think we're going to be covering various subjects, a lot about kind of your software engineering career, but also going to be touching quite a bit on venture capital, which is something that I don't think we've kind of spoken about in any previous episodes, and it's certainly something that I'd be interested in learning a little bit more about. So let's just dive straight in. Then maybe do you want to describe your role at Moonfire and for listeners that might not have heard of yours, just kind of go into a little bit about what Moonfire does.
Sure. I think I'll do that in the opposite order. I'll describe what Moonfire does and then sort of like where I fit into that. But basically, Moonfire is a pre-seed and seed stage venture capital firm, which means that we invest in startups that are raising either their pre-seed or seed rounds, basically the first rounds that they might raise from institutional investors to get their business going. That's where we specialize in really helping entrepreneurs like through that early journey and helping them build their first products and get to market and stuff like this. This is our business model. We focus on companies in 4 sectors: fintech, future of work, gaming, and e-health. And we primarily focus on European startups from across the whole continent. So that's our sort of sector, stage, and geo remit, as I like to say. And then one of the key differentiators about Moonfire is that we aim to use software, data, and machine learning to optimize and accelerate as much of the venture lifecycle as possible, from sourcing, screening, and evaluating potential investment opportunities to helping our portfolio founders succeed to, producing sort of like data and reporting for our investors, for doing all the statistical modeling and simulation of the sort of current funds that we're investing out of and stuff like this. We aim to apply like software, data, machine learning to all of that. And that part of Moonfire broadly is my remit. So I've been working at Moonfire pretty much since the beginning, 2.5 years ago. And for a while, it was just me working on all of that stuff. And sort of towards the end of last year, we decided to really double down on that aspect of Moonfire. And now there are 4 of us working on machine learning at Moonfire, 3 additional folks that we hired towards the end of last year who each have sort of like really impressive professional backgrounds as well as academic backgrounds, and are also just like really amazing people to work with as individuals. I can go into more detail on any of that if it would be helpful.
Yeah, for sure. So like I think we'll come to hiring processes in a little bit, because I know when we chatted before, you just kind of said that you kind of tend to have for lack of a better phrase, kind of a mentor role over some startups and helping them with their hire processes as well, especially for tech roles. So we'll touch on that in a little bit. I just kind of want to talk a little bit more about venture capital specifically, because it is something that we haven't touched on before. So I definitely don't come from a venture capital background, but I would be interested to see kind of, I know you said that you're kind of in your early stages at Moonfire, but what kind of challenges have you come across so far? I know it's a very broad question, but what kind of challenges have you come across in your journey at Moonfire so far, and how have you kind of approached creating the solutions for those as well?
Yeah, I guess I'll go through the broad challenges of like that like a venture capital firm or like a venture capitalist in general might face, and then maybe we can dig into some of the specific challenges that we face and sort of like our perspective on approaching them, because we take a very like, I like to say that at Moonfire, we aim to be like a software business, like a tech company that does venture capital rather than a venture capital firm that uses technology. Because in addition to sort of speaking to how we use technology, I think this speaks to how we work, how we organize ourselves, how we communicate with each other, how we prioritize projects and stuff like this. So I think that will like seep into some of the solution space that I'll describe as well. But in general, I think it might be useful to sort of just outline the series of challenges that one might face as a venture capitalist, starting from the beginning, which is sort of, I guess, raising your fund. So generally the way that like traditional institutional venture capital firms work is you raise money, much like a startup would raise money, but you raise money from a cast of characters, and you then invest that money into other startups. So the kinds of entities that you might raise money from are what are called funds of funds, which are venture capital firms that invest in other venture capital firms. You might raise money from like pension funds or university endowments or sovereign wealth funds or hedge funds or just very wealthy individuals. You sort of like go through a long fundraising cycle, and you try to raise sort of, say, our first fund, for example, that we raised about 2 years ago was 60 million US dollars. So we spent like a fair bit of time, raised that money, and then you come up with like a set of ideally you do this before you go raise the money, but you come up with a set of like parameters for exactly how you're going to spend it. So you might say, okay, we've got this $60 million. We're going to invest it into this many startups. We'll invest around this much. We'll aim to get this much ownership based on this sort of statistical distribution of success. We expect that to ideally result in this kinds of returns for our investors and stuff like that. So you really have like two classes of customers. You have your investors, and then most importantly, you have your founders, who basically you can see as a customer as well. So first you raise your fund, and that sort of presents challenges for sure that you have to deal with and work through. But then once you raise your fund, you can start investing it. And that's when sort of the subject matter of venture becomes really prevalent, I think, because then your challenges are more around like, how do you find the best opportunities? How do you find the best companies to invest in? What does it mean for a company to be a really good opportunity at the early stage? And really, I like to say, like, generally the life cycle is like you do pre-seed investing, or maybe you raise a pre-seed round and then a seed round and then a series A, B, C, D, E. Maybe eventually you like list on like the London Stock Exchange, or like get sold to another company or something. And this is sort of from the venture capitalist perspective, an exit event. So we do these very early pre-seed and seed stage rounds. And I always like to say that, like, once you get to series A, the venture capitalist decision-making process is about the quantitative metrics about the company, sort of like revenue, recurring revenue specifically, customer acquisition cost, basically like very quantitative metrics about the company and its performance. Whereas at the pre-seed and seed stage, you're making decisions based on sort of your perspective on the market and product in category, and the founders. Importantly, it's all about the founders. So I always like to say, like, at Series A and beyond, you're doing company analytics, and at pre-seed and seed, you're doing people analytics. So the primary unit of sort of calculation that we have to sort of like build evaluation models or what have you is all people. So it's like, how do we find the people that are starting the best companies, and what do they look like, and what kind of companies are they starting, and stuff like this. And for this, it's very much like a network-driven effort, as well as one can build a critical area for us is to build infrastructure for this, to sort of like identify who these people are as early as possible, and to build as much infrastructure as possible to evaluate them in an automated fashion, so that we could really focus on who these best individuals are that we should spend our time sort of like getting to know and reaching out to and stuff like that. And then, so that's all the sort of like sourcing, screening, and evaluation and prioritization and stuff like that. And that's like a whole bit of subject matter that we work on. And then another problem that arises that perhaps people don't really expect is that oftentimes the best opportunities are quite sought after by a lot of venture capitalists, and you have to sort of the best companies often have multiple offers, for example, for investing, and the founders will decide based on a variety of parameters which venture capital firm they want to work with. So we call this access, like winning deals. So another pretty significant challenge that a venture capitalist might face is how to sort of like create a winning hand such that they can win access to the best deals. Once you've identified the best deals, it doesn't really matter if you can never get into the best deals. So that becomes a whole degree of effort as well. And then once you have awesome companies in your portfolio, you have a responsibility then to sort of like support them in whatever support means to you and your venture capital firm. And Moonfire definitely has a perspective on this. We primarily help with things like sales and growth and hiring, which we can talk about in more detail, as well as like fundraising for future rounds and like navigating this like venture capital ecosystem as an entrepreneur and stuff like that. And sort of like this whole aspect of like portfolio support and how to like offer the best support to your portfolio companies. And then there's a whole broader broad set of challenges around sort of like what kind of information our investors want as venture capitalists. Like we have investors too, and we have to sort of like provide information to them and reporting and make sure that they are sort of like kept abreast of our performance, because like we very well might be raising another fund in a few years, and sort of like want as many of our current investors along on that journey as possible, and stuff like this. So there's this whole like life cycle of challenges from beginning to end that like affect all of the different stakeholders that you have as a venture capital firm.
Yeah, for sure. It sounds like a super kind of complex, well, there's a bunch of different factors going on there, isn't there? But I really like the way that you've explained that, to kind of, you've put it really simply, for, again, someone like me who isn't from that kind of background at all. You've made it sound really simple, but it's obviously not. It's obviously a very complex thing. And you've also just helped a little bit, kind of segue me into my next sort of question, really, because I'm quite interested in to see how, like you say, you help kind of the growth side of things within the companies, like after you've done a deal and things like that, that kind of end part of that life cycle. To maybe just go into a little bit like how you help with the hiring process, particularly. I know you said before maybe it was more specifically for kind of tech roles and things like that, because that's kind of where that's the background that you come from with your career as well. So just kind of walk me through a little bit of how you would approach, and do companies kind of ask you for help, or do you kind of offer it first? Like, how does it kind of work, and how do you get started to help companies with that sort of thing?
Yeah, for sure. So with regards to the medium in which we offer support after we invest in an early stage company, that's usually sort of we'll set up like bi-weekly calls with the founders. So a very sort of like regular but relatively informal way to set up regular communication. So not necessarily like monthly board meetings or something like that, really just sort of like embedding ourselves in the sort of day-to-day problems of the organization and making sure that we're there sort of communicating with them frequently enough so that we can understand what their current sets of problems are and how we can best situate ourselves to help. And one broad area where we often spend a lot of time working with our portfolio companies, as you mentioned, is for sure hiring. Now, this isn't always technical hiring, but from my perspective, I guess I mostly personally help with the technical hiring because that's my sort of professional background. So I'll explain sort of some of the ways that that's manifested in the past, and use some examples from technical hiring. But again, it's often for like sales or marketing leaders as well. So keep that in mind, I guess. But for technical hiring, for example, like it manifests in a few different ways. For example, like on one side of the spectrum, we've had a fair few portfolio companies who for example, start the company with like a CEO and a chief product officer, and the chief product officer like puts together a MVP version of the product with like no code, low code tools, starts to get some good revenue. Like we sort of invest in the product at that time, and then the CEO and CPO decide that it's time to bring on a sort of like more explicit, like seasoned engineering leader as CTO who can like build out a engineering team, but they don't necessarily have these technical skills to really evaluate that person, or to really like know deeply about like the tech stacks of different companies that they might want to hire from and stuff like this. So in these situations, I will sort of embed myself pretty deeply into that hiring process throughout the whole stack of like helping them ideate on like what kind of person they need, where this person might exist, how we might go about sourcing for that role, whether that's like the founders doing search and outreach or working with third-party search firms like Amicus or what have you, and really like going through sort of like what the demographic and search strategy should be for that, and then also like constructing a technical interview loop that is both robust enough to do the requisite level of technical due diligence while also being respectful enough of the candidate's time, and stuff, and trying to like work through this balance and stuff like this. And then I'll often sit on those interview loops and do like parts of the both technical and leadership assessments. And we've done this for 4 of our current portfolio companies successfully each time. And so that's been awesome. That's like a relatively unique way that we can add support, given that I have this technical background that we've been in a lot of experience and get a lot of enjoyment out of technical hiring. So that's been awesome. But on the other hand, there's also like sort of like more of a volume recruitment need that our portfolio companies have. And for this, we'll often work with them on like sort of how to set up the sort of internal infrastructure to handle high quality just recruitment in general at the business, and sort of like really investing in like an HR people function, and sort of like how to reason about maintaining company culture as the number of people on the team grows. And again, what kind of like scalable, sustainable technical assessment one can introduce that's again like deep enough to provide sort of the technical due diligence required while also being respectful of the candidate's time and stuff like this. And occasionally, like I'll often sit on those interviews as well. So it really goes through the whole spectrum there, as well as sometimes just like being a sounding board for like sometimes founders like just don't need our help with like the actual like execution or mechanics of the hiring process, but like enjoy a sounding board to bounce around like, hey, is it appropriate for us to start making these hires to scale out this part of our like product development objectives and stuff like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. It's nice to know that you've got kind of that unique. Does that give you the edge, do you find, then, if you're going for deals that you can solve, or is that something that a lot of people generally kind of offer out as well, like the help with that hiring structure? And like you said, particularly with your experience, which we'll go into in a sec, like, do you find that like a lot of people try and offer their help with hiring and structuring one of their kind of ventures, or is that something that Moonfire specifically can kind of offer? I guess I'm just plugging you guys massively here, but I'm quite interested to know how common that is,
sure.
or is it a common thing though, or is it something that you guys particularly do?
I appreciate it for sure. Yeah. And I'd say like most early stage startups struggle with 3 broad categories, as I mentioned: fundraising, sort of product growth / sales, depending on whether they're a B2C or a B2B company, and hiring. So it's not uncommon for investors, I'd say, to have a perspective on how they help with hiring. Mm-hmm. And at Moonfire, like we definitely, I think, have a broad perspective on how we can help with hiring. And one thing that is relatively unique, I'd say, yes, for sure, is the fact that we can help so deeply with technical hiring and have such a established track record of doing so successfully with our portfolio companies, which obviously in the beginning we didn't. Like, we just tried to help as however we could, and one of the ways that we could was through technical hiring, and now we've done that several times and have like a really good track record of helping our portfolio with that. So that's definitely like something we lean on. The other ways that I personally sort of like to work with our portfolio companies. Now, I'll mention this, like I'm but a like small slice of portfolio support at Moonfire. Like the other members of the investment team like spend a lot of time helping our portfolio with a lot of different things. So I don't want this to come across to listeners as like, these are the only ways that Moonfire adds support. Like this is like maybe like 10% of it or something. But the other things that I'll work with our portfolio companies on along the lines of like technical support, or things like sort of, I have a background in sort of like machine learning architecture and infrastructure, which I can go into more detail on. And sort of I spent a lot of time with some of our portfolio companies diving into sort of like, hey, we have this new recommendation algorithm that we want to build. Like, this is the data that we have available to us. This is the data we could start collecting. Like, how should we reason about constructing this part of our organization? Like, basically the first fledgling like machine learning infrastructure and architecture kinds of discussions. And then I also have a few portfolio companies where I do sort of like kind of more like philosophical, like engineering leadership coaching type things of like how to reason about like goal setting and like building the team to like kind of center around a set of sort of engineering principles, and like what are engineering principles that matter and how do they influence the sort of like quality of software that one delivers and stuff like this, which I quite enjoy for sure. I enjoy a lot of like engineering quality discussion and stuff like this. So that's been quite fun. But really, ultimately, it's however we can help. You know, we have this like broad skill set and we try to just like add value as much as possible. The other thing is I have like a bit of a background in sort of like modern like blockchain infrastructure. And we invest in a lot of like Web3 blockchain companies. So I also spend a lot of time sort of with our portfolio companies reasoning about like L1 selection, like whether Ethereum or Solana or something like this, as well as like how to go around structuring like what parts of the application should execute on chain versus off chain, and sort of like general blockchain architecture. Then we have another person on our team, Jonas, who's awesome, who used to be, before he got into machine learning, was an economist, which is a really awesome kind of combination of skills. And one thing that he's really interested in and has put a lot of work into is sort of like understanding the tokenomics distributions of crypto companies. So he's able to really work with a lot of our portfolio companies that are going through that thought process of deciding their like tokenomics distribution, and help them with that. So there's a lot of stuff like that as well across the rest of the team.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's so impressive, like, to hear. I think it's a lot to take in, I guess, as well. Like, do you find then, I'm going to like slightly off track here, but do you find that you obviously have so much more insight to gift to the people that you're working with, well, colleagues, but also the people that you've been doing deals with as well? Do you find that they get kind of overwhelmed by the process, and you kind of, do you need like to help out a little bit like on the softer side of things in terms of like walking them through the whole process and how it actually works, or is it a little bit more technical than that? Do you find that they kind of, I'm not saying, do you work with people that don't know what they're doing in terms of the people that you've the businesses that you're working with, but more do you kind of instill your knowledge onto them, or do they already know what they're doing in terms of venture capital? And do you find yourself explaining it quite often, or is it something that generally people already know what they're doing? And is that something that you would recommend people doing before getting into venture capital? Or do you think that there is a community there that can be lent on in terms of learning?
Yeah, I would say generally our founders are pretty informed about how the venture capital process works. And I would say if we met a founder who wasn't super informed about how venture capital worked, that would, I guess, be a bit of a flag. There's a lot of resources out there, like really high quality resources on how the venture capital process works from the entrepreneur's perspective. Interestingly, there's a lot less information out there on how venture capital works from the venture capitalist perspective. So like if you want to become a venture capitalist, then the information is out there, but like a bit kind of like perhaps less organized. But from the entrepreneur's perspective, there's definitely a lot of resources. One that I would recommend is there's this book by Brad Feld called Venture Deals, which is like a bit of a classic. I'm sure anyone who's like an entrepreneur who's like hearing me recommend Venture Deals will chuckle, but like it's called like Venture Deals, How to Be Smarter Than Your Lawyer. And I don't know if you'll necessarily like leave that book being smarter than your lawyer, but like it's a good book that covers a lot of interesting stuff from the entrepreneur's perspective. I would say it's not a great book from the venture capitalist perspective because it's very limited information on that side of things. But that's a really good book. Like one should read it. One should like know how the like venture capital is an asset class like real estate or the public market, stocks and shares and stuff like this. Like it's basically like a financial engineering thing that like manifests in modern capitalism, and like one can and should, I think, reason about it from a bit of that perspective, as well as like the human process. Now, with regards to like the support that we can provide, I think a lot of our founders sort of like have a hopefully robust perspective on like what they need help with. And the thing that we really try to like ingrain, I guess, is like, here's the spectrum of things we can help with. Like if any of those would be useful, please ask. And if there's anything explicit that like you do need help with, like, please let us know. And like, how can we be a partner in that? So it's kind of a trope. You always hear venture capitalists like say things like, oh, how can I help? Or like, how can I, please like, let me know if I could ever be helpful. And it's all sort of, there's like kind of not a bit of backlash, but like there's a bit of sort of feedback from the industry, if you will, that like venture capitalists need to have a better perspective on like, here's how I help, here's how I can add value to you. Like, don't ask people how you can help, like tell people how you can help, kind of thing. So we always try to like make sure that we are like observing what we think sort of like inefficiencies or deficiencies might be in like proposing solutions to them rather than putting that on the entrepreneur. But it's always useful if the entrepreneur also has like a understanding and articulation of like what the things they're struggling with and what the things they need help are. Because if anything, I think that just illustrates a sort of like degree of maturity of perspective, if you will.
Yeah, sure. I love that. And I love a good book recommendation as well. I think that's the first one we've had on the live series so far. So I might have to start making that a little bit of a feature, have a little book corner or something like that. But that's brilliant. You mentioned a little bit about your, like, let's go into your background a little bit, like your experience and everything. I know you come from a software engineering background, and I know you've been a CTO as well, and you've done some work at Etsy and Facebook too. So just sort of for people again that might not know your work, do you want to just go into a little bit of your background and kind of maybe that transition into venture capital as well?
Sure, yeah, for sure. So I went to university for computer science and math, and my first job at a university was as a professional hacker. I did that at two companies, sort of as sort of focused on cryptography, secure protocols, and like infrastructure security. I did that for several years and ultimately like started to write more and more tooling and software to automate various aspects of the hacking, and found that I liked some of the engineering aspects more than the offensive security aspects. So transitioned into engineering roles, first at Etsy in New York, as you mentioned, and then I sort of moved to California to take a role at Facebook as a software engineer. And both roles kind of focused on data science, machine learning meets distributed data infrastructure. While I was at Facebook, I built and sort of open sourced a tool called OS Query, which is now one of the most popular open source security tools in the world, which is quite cool. The Facebook open source machine kind of has a mind of its own sometimes. And then after Facebook, I was co-founder CTO of an infrastructure analytics startup that aimed to democratize a lot of the analytics infrastructure that we were building at Facebook for other SMBs. I was also a member of the Kubernetes core team, which is the fastest growing open source project in the world, which was started by Google. And I was a research engineer at Mila, which is a academic AI research lab in Montreal, founded by Turing Award winner Yoshua Bengio, which is where a lot of really fundamental machine learning came from, like deep fakes and GANs and stuff like that. And then before Moonfire, I was living in Boulder, Colorado, working as machine learning architect at Workday, where I was responsible for the data science engineering and infrastructure for Workday's machine learning based search and recommendation infrastructure. And in this role, I sort of like learned a lot and spent a lot of time getting really deep with using the deep learning for natural language ecosystem, so like the transformer-based ecosystem, to create sort of search and recommendation products within the professional domain. So people, companies, learning content, job descriptions, and stuff like this. This whole domain is very natural language based, which is kind of like why I was drawn into it, because I love like natural language as a machine learning outlet. And yeah, so I worked on that for several years, really enjoyed the technical subject matter of what I was working on, deep learning for natural language applied to search and recommendation, but kind of didn't really enjoy as much working for a like large, slow moving corporate enterprise. So I moved to London and was really fortunate to be introduced to my partner, Matthias, sort of right as he was starting Moonfire. And he told me about this vision that he had for creating a sort of machine learning based venture capital firm that would be sort of built from the ground up as a technology company that does venture rather than a venture capital firm that uses technology. I thought this was super inspiring. And I still think that there's a lot of ways that one could reason about sourcing, screening, and evaluating potential investment opportunities as a sort of machine learning based search and recommendation problem, methodologically and mathematically, which is a lot of how we approach it at Moonfire. So I was super hooked, loved the subject matter, loved the technology, loved this sort of early stage entrepreneurial ecosystem, had a bit of experience with venture capital from the founder's perspective, but not much from like an institutional investor's perspective, which was definitely like an interesting opportunity to learn. I've been doing that for the past like 2.5 years, and I've learned a lot about how venture capital works and the asset class and sort of like in finance in general, I guess. And yeah, that's sort of like my trajectory to here, if you will.
Yeah, I mean it's a pretty decent CV, really. On paper, it's a pretty impressive career that you've had. And I know when we chatted before, like you're obviously so passionate about what you do, and it is super inspiring. And I'm sure This episode's absolutely brilliant to our listeners, to be fair. What do you do to wind down outside of work? I mean, do you have time to wind down at all? Do you do anything other? And what is that, and how does it affect your work? Do you kind of, do you take time to wind down in order to kind of benefit the way you work almost, or do you kind of sometimes just think, I need to switch off, I've got to just completely detach from this for a little bit?
Yeah, I would say outside, I mean, I definitely see like, for me, work is definitely I program for fun. Like, I really enjoy sort of like computer science, as it's like a hobby for me, in addition to something that I've been able to like weasel into being a career as well. So for me, like, a lot of the work that I do is very fun, and I definitely like program in my free time for fun and stuff like that. And the optimal life situation for me is where the things that I would be working on for fun anyway are also the things that add value at work. So with regards to like tech computer science, like there's definitely a lot of aspects of that. But then I would say outside of tech, the main thing that I'm really passionate about is mountain sports. So I do a lot of like sort of like trail running and rock climbing and skiing and stuff like this, depending on the season, and where in the world I am at that moment or what have you. So that's I really enjoy it. Like I really enjoy training for sports, sort of with like in a rigorous way. Like the theory of training is like an interesting thing that one could like dive into for sure. But yeah, so I could say that's my main sort of like outside of work hobby, is sort of mountain sports.
From one extreme to the next, then in that case, it's I was thinking maybe the guy likes a cup of tea in the garden in the sun or something, or just likes putting his feet up. But no, you're an extreme mountain sports kind of guy in your spare time. I love that. That's really cool. Do you do that quite often then? Is that something that you get to do, like, how many times throughout the year? I suppose, do you do a lot of it in the UK as well?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely like, I think the UK is, I live in London at the moment. We're moving up to Scotland in a few months,
Okay.
largely to orient more around sort of like the outdoor sports ecosystem in the UK, and to be closer to some family and stuff. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of like amazing, for example, bouldering in the UK. It's like very world class for that, as well as like hill walking and mountain running. I feel like bagging Munros is like the national sport of Scotland. So like if you're into sort of like moving quickly and efficiently in the mountains, like that's really great. So yeah, for sure. But there's also like the rest of Europe right here. And I moved here from Colorado. So there's like different activities. Like I really enjoy skiing in Colorado and France and stuff like that. So there's a lot of different things that one could do in different places based on the sort of topography of that area, I'd say, for sure. But the UK has no shortage of really amazing countryside and really amazing things to do in that countryside, I would say.
Oh, that's great. I'm glad you think so. I think I'm gonna have to start getting into things like that. There's been a couple of guests now that have started saying that the UK is really good for that sort of thing. Maybe I've been taking advantage a little bit and not bothering, but this time next week I'll be halfway up the mountain anyway. So,
well, you're kind of not far from the Peak District, right?
no, I know this is what I'm saying. I've been a bit ignorant towards it really as well. And I grew up in the northeast, and we've got a lot of lovely walks around kind of the Yorkshire Moors and the Yorkshire Dales and stuff like that as well. So yeah, it's
Yeah,
pretty.
well, the Peak District is an international climbing destination.
Yeah, no, I know. Don't shame me anymore, Mike. Come on, this is. I'll find a mountain. I'll do it.
Growing up in the US as a climber, I sort of knew about England, like before I sort of like married an English woman and all of this, like I knew that the UK had like a queen, it had Big Ben, and it had the Peak District. Like that's really like all I knew about the
Wow,
UK
the top
as
three.
a kid. So the Peak District was like pretty early in my sort of like the things that I learned about the UK. So it's a really awesome bit of countryside that you guys have here for sure.
Yeah. Have you been up then, I guess?
Yeah, so my wife is actually from Sheffield.
Oh, no way. Okay.
And my brother-in-law still lives in Sheffield, and is also like a avid boulder. Sort of like UK climbing culture is like a big part of like that family, and we definitely try to get up there as much as possible for sure. And her parents now live in Northumberland, where there's also actually quite good bouldering. So we definitely we like to boulder a lot for sure.
Yeah, I love Northumberland. I was just in Alnwick a couple of weeks ago. It's so beautiful there.
I got married in Alnwick, actually.
No way. Oh wow, that's incredible. It's such a lovely place, isn't it? Yeah, I've got a friend, one of my best friends, just moved up there recently, so it's I'm just kind of treating her place as a holiday home at the moment, going up every now and then when I can.
Oh, nice.
All right, well, we went a little bit off track there, but I will just ask you one last question. And it's more, I mean, we've probably covered a little bit of this already anyway, Mike, but I just kind of want to know, for anybody maybe trying to climb the software engineering ladder, or maybe for somebody trying to get into venture capital as an industry, what kind of advice off the top of your head would you have that you kind of wish that you'd known at kind of any point going into certain challenges in your career?
Yeah, I guess those are two kind of different questions. So I'll answer the software engineering one first. I think with regards to, I always say like with regards to being an engineer, in my opinion, the most important skill that an engineer can have is the ability to like learn new things quickly and integrate them into one's mental model of reality. So I feel like as engineers, we spend so much time like really having no idea what we're doing, but like having the core skill set to go and figure it out, like Googling and Stack Overflowing, and like over time, you sort of like develop a mental model that allows you to execute independently without like external resources, which is awesome. But really like the most important skill that you have as an engineer that's going to take you through your entire career as like technologies, tools, languages, and all of this change and evolve is the ability to learn new things. So I think always be learning new things, always be open to new bits of technology. You see people on like Hacker News that are like pretty anti this new emerging technology or that new emerging technology or what have you. And I think like fostering a degree of like intellectual curiosity and autodidacticism and sort of like the ability to like teach yourself new things about new things is super important. And it's like the emergent skill from which everything else will follow. Now to become like a better, like more senior engineer, when I worked at Etsy, the SVP of engineering, who then became the CTO, is called John Allspaw. Super influential person for me, wrote a blog article called On Being a Senior Engineer. And he sort of like, enumerates like 10 years ago at this point, but he enumerates, I'll send you a link as well for like show notes or something.
Yeah, sure.
But he sort of enumerates lots of properties of senior engineers, such as, don't shy away from making estimates, try to make estimates and continually get better at them, sort of like lift the skills and expertise of those around you, focus on mentorship, stuff like this. So I really recommend like really reading that content, like engaging with it and incorporating it into your perspective for sure. But ultimately, I think really focus on sort of like being a lifelong learner. For sure. And then with regards to getting into venture capital, I guess like if you want to be a venture capitalist, I think the most effective way to do about that is like to go about being an operator, like be a founder or early employee in a startup and sort of go through that journey. Ideally have some success and sort of like just learn about how to build companies successfully and sort of like gain some credibility online and some experience that you can then offer to others. Being a venture capitalist is a lot of like leaning into your perspective that you might have built over the course of your career and through over the course of a variety of experience that you have, and then offer like using that to like ideally make good decisions that allow you to outperform other sort of like venture capitalists, if you will, from a financial perspective, while also like offering sort of perspective to your portfolio companies that allow them to outperform as well. So you need to have that underlying set of insight. And I think one of the best ways to put together that insight is sort of like working in early stage companies as an operator, and whether that's for you as like sales, growth, marketing, engineering, what have you, just like gaining that critical perspective on like how one builds a company.
Yeah, get that first-hand experience before you kind of, that's amazing advice. That's actually really incredible advice. What a fascinating episode, Mike. Thank you so much. It's been absolutely lovely talking to you. And I feel like we probably could have got at least another 4 or 5 episodes out of you. So we might ask you back again to talk about some various other subjects as well, and hopefully I'll have gone for a hike in the peaks after that point as well, so we can talk about that. If you're watching on YouTube, hover over the logo in the bottom corner and hit subscribe. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn and TikTok at Amicus Jobs for updates. Head over to our website amicusjobs.com for tech news, webinars, blogs, and keep up to date on the latest Python, Golang and JavaScript roles all over the globe. Mike, thanks again so much for joining me today. It's been brilliant.
It's been awesome. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much.